She ran without shoes. That was the thing nobody tells you about escaping, that when the moment finally comes, when your body overrides 5 years of fear and just moves, you don't always grab everything you planned. Naya had a bag packed for 3 months. It sat behind the loose panel under the bathroom sink, ready. Toothbrush, cash, prepaid phone, a folded napkin with an address on it. She had rehearsed the night in her head so many times she could recite it like scripture. Wait until Marcus leaves for his Thursday dinner. Take the bag. Walk, don't run, to the bus stop on Ellery Street. Don't look back. She looked back. Not because she wanted to, because she heard the door. Marcus wasn't supposed to be home until 11. It was 9:42. Naya heard his key in the lock the same second she pulled the bag from under the sink, and every rehearsed plan she had dissolved in an instant. She shoved the bag back, stood up, tried to arrange her face into something calm. But her hands were shaking, and Marcus noticed hands. He walked into the bathroom doorway and looked at her. That was all. He just looked. And somehow that was worse than anything he could have said, because the looking always came before everything else. "You're up late," he said. "Couldn't sleep," she said. The silence between them had texture. It had weight. 5 years of marriage had taught Naya to read every frequency of Marcus Reeves' silence, and this one, this specific, stretched, watching silence, sat at the top of the danger register. He stepped into the bathroom, looked at the sink, looked at the floor. His eyes moved the way they always did when he was searching for evidence of something, cataloging, calculating. Marcus was never loud in these moments. That was the thing people never understood about men like him. The loud ones were almost easier. The loud ones gave you noise to brace against. Marcus went quiet the way a room goes quiet before a storm, and then he closed the distance between them so smoothly, it barely looked like movement. The first blow sent her into the towel rack. Naya didn't make a sound. She had learned not to. She hit the floor, and her cheek caught the corner of the cabinet on the way down, and she tasted blood immediately, copper and bright, and for one strange, suspended second, everything went very still inside her. And then something shifted. Not rage. Rage was too hot. This was colder than that. This was clarity. She got up. Marcus blinked. In 5 years, she had never gotten up that fast. She didn't look at him. She reached under the sink, pulled the bag out in one motion, walked past him out of the bathroom, out of the bedroom, down the stairs, and through the front door before he had fully processed what was happening. She heard him shout her name from the top of the stairs. She was already running. Nostrils. Split lip. One hand on the bag, and one hand pressing the napkin to her chest like it was the only real thing left in the world. If you are new here, welcome. Please subscribe, like this video, and drop a comment below. It helps this channel more than you know. Now, let's get back to Naya. She made the bus stop on Ellery Street in 11 minutes. Her feet were bleeding by the time she sat down. The night was wet, not full rain, just that thick misting kind that gets into everything, and she sat under the bus shelter with her knees pressed together, and her jaw set, and her eyes absolutely dry. She was done crying for Marcus Reeve. She had cried enough in that house to fill something vast. There was nothing left in her for tears tonight. She unfolded the napkin. Her coworker Solange had pressed it into her palm 3 weeks ago in the break room, low-voiced and urgent. "I'm not asking questions, baby. But if you ever need somewhere to go, my cousin works at this estate on the north side. They always need domestic staff. Management doesn't ask questions about your past, they just need you to work. Here's the address." Naya had almost thrown it away twice. Tonight it was the only thing standing between her and the street. The bus came. She got on. She sat in the back and watched the city slide past the window, the lights blurring in the wet glass, and she let herself feel one thing, just one, before she locked it all down again. She felt the shape of what she was leaving. Not missing it, just acknowledging it. 5 years. A wedding. A life that looked correct from the outside. A home that was a beautiful, well-decorated trap. She let herself feel the size of that, the weight of it, and then she folded it up and put it somewhere deep and quiet. She would deal with it later. Right now she needed to find a door that Marcus didn't have a key to. The bus dropped her 2 blocks from the address. She walked. The neighborhood changed around her as she moved. Quieter, the streets wider, the houses set further back from the road behind gates and carefully managed trees. This was the kind of wealth that didn't advertise itself.
No flashy design, no loud architecture.
Just space. The kind of space that money buys specifically to keep the world at a distance. She found the gate. Black iron.
Tall.
A camera mounted on the left pillar blinked a slow red pulse in the dark, and for a moment Naya just stood there in the rain with her bleeding feet and her split lip and the single bag hanging from her shoulder, and she thought, what are you doing?
You don't know these people.
You don't know this place. But she also knew what was behind her. She pressed the intercom. Silence. Naya pressed the intercom a second time. The rain had picked up now, not misting anymore but actually falling, and it ran down the back of her neck and soaked through the shoulder of her jacket. She stood there and waited and tried to look like a person who had options. A voice came through the speaker. Male, flat, a slight Korean accent clipping the edges of the words. Who are you? My name is Naya. I'm looking for work. Domestic staff. My co-worker, her name is Solange. Her cousin told her you sometimes hire. I know it's late.
I'm sorry.
She stopped. Reorganized. I have nowhere else to go tonight. I'll work for the room if I have to. A long pause. The camera above her shifted slightly. Someone was looking at her on a screen somewhere, reading the bruise on her face, the bare feet, the single bag. She didn't flinch from it. Let them look. The truth was on her face whether she wanted it there or not. The gate opened. A man met her at the front door. He was in his 50s, Korean, wearing a dark jacket over a collared shirt, and he had the kind of face that had stopped registering surprise at anything a long time ago. He looked at her for 3 full seconds, her face, her feet, her bag, and then he said, "Can you cook?" Yes. Full meals? Not just basics. Yes. He stepped back from the doorway.
I'm Mr. Ja.
I manage the household staff. You'll have a room in the East Hall, end of the corridor. There are 2 other staff members. You will not have issues with either of them. Your hours are 6 in the morning until the household retires. You'll have Sunday afternoons free. He paused. We value discretion here above everything else. Do you understand what that means? It means I don't talk about this house to anyone outside it, Naya said. Mr. Cho almost looked approving. Correct. She followed him inside. The house was, she had no other word for it, still. Not empty still, but controlled still. Every surface in its place, every light at exactly the right level, the kind of interior that had been designed to project a very specific kind of authority. Beautiful but not warm. Like a museum that someone actually lived in. Mr. Cho showed her to a room at the end of the East Hall. Plain, clean, a single bed and a small window and a bathroom attached. The smallest room she had ever been so relieved to see. Whose house is this? She asked. Mr. Cho had already turned to leave. He paused at the door. Someone who values discretion, he said. Keep to your work and you'll be fine here.
He left.
The door didn't lock from the outside. She checked, immediately, the way you learn to check these things. She sat on the edge of the bed in a stranger's house in a stranger's uniform that Mr. Cho had left folded on the chair, and the adrenaline began to drain out of her like water from a cracked glass. Her hands were shaking. Her lip had started to swell. Her feet were leaving faint rust-colored prints on the floor. But she was breathing. Really breathing. Chest full. Steady. No part of her braced for a sound. She hadn't breathed like that in 5 years. She slept. Morning came fast. Naya was up at 5:30 out of pure habit. Marcus had liked breakfast on the table by 6:15 without fail, and 5 years of conditioning didn't dissolve overnight. She found the kitchen without difficulty, a large, well-stocked, immaculately organized space that told her immediately that whoever ran this household ran it with precision. She was studying the pantry when the second staff member arrived, a small, quiet woman named Ji-Yun who communicated mostly in nods but showed Naya where everything was with efficient, wordless efficiency. By 6:45, Naya had prepared a full breakfast spread and was learning the coffee setup when she felt it. The house shifted. It was subtle. Ji-Yun straightened almost imperceptibly. The faint sounds of movement from upstairs took on a different quality, and the air in the kitchen seemed to tighten by a single degree. Naya turned toward the doorway just as footsteps came down the hall. Deliberate. Unhurried. The footsteps of someone who had never once needed to announce himself because every room he entered already knew he was coming. Park Sung-Jin walked into the kitchen. He was not what she had built in her head overnight. She had imagined something obvious, loud money, obvious menace, the kind of dangerous that performs itself. This was nothing like that. He was tall, lean in the particular way of someone who stayed in excellent condition not for aesthetics, but for function. Dark hair, sharp jaw, wearing a charcoal dress shirt with the cuffs rolled to the forearm.
No jewelry.
No excess of anything. He moved to the coffee machine like she wasn't there. Poured his own cup. Didn't wait for Ji-Yun or for Naya, just handled it himself, with the casual ease of someone who had decided a long time ago that relying on other people for small things was an inefficiency. He stood at the counter and read something on his phone while he drank. Then he set the cup down and, without looking up from the phone, said, "You're new." "Yes," Naya said. "Name?"
Naya.
"There are 3 rules." He looked up then, and his eyes, dark, direct, and carrying an intelligence that assessed everything in the room in about 2 seconds, landed on her. "Don't go into the East Wing.
Don't answer the landline.
Don't ask about my schedule or my guests." "Understood," Naya said. He looked at her for 1 beat longer, then was strictly professional. Not in the way Marcus looked at her. Not possessive or assessing her for threat. More like he had noticed something he wasn't expecting and was filing it away. Then he picked up his coffee and walked out of the kitchen without another word. Naya let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Ji-Yun glanced at her sideways. "He's always like that," she said quietly. First words the woman had spoken all morning. "You get used to it." Naya wasn't sure that was true. But she turned back to the stove and got on with the work because working was the one thing that had always made sense to her regardless of what was collapsing around it. That night, alone in her room, she took out the prepaid phone and searched the name she'd caught on a letter on the hallway console table that morning. The one Mr. Cho had been holding. 2 words, in clean block print at the top of the envelope. Park Sung-Jin. The search results came back sparse. Intentionally sparse. She recognized that immediately, the way a deliberately cleaned surface still has the shape of what was wiped away. But there was enough. A business name attached to 3 shell companies. A court case from 7 years ago, dismissed. A photograph from a charity event, Sung-Jin in a suit shaking hands with a city official, both of them smiling the careful smile of men who understand exactly what they're performing. And a single line in a financial blog post from 4 years ago, buried in a paragraph about organized crime restructuring in the city, the consolidation of the Northern Distribution Network under a figure known in enforcement circles only as the Park Air, whose operation has thus far proven untouchable. Naya set the phone face down on the bed. She sat very still for a long time. She thought about leaving. She mapped the exit in her head, bus route, destination, alternatives. Then she thought about Marcus. About the way he'd looked at her in the bathroom doorway tonight. About the fact that he had resources and patience and a face that the world trusted. She picked the phone back up and turned the screen off. She was staying. 10 days passed. Naya learned the house the way she had learned to survive her marriage. Through observation, through patience, through the careful cataloging of what was safe and what wasn't. She kept to her work. She made no errors. She did not go into the East Wing.
She did not answer the landline.
She did not ask about schedules or guests. And she watched. Men came and went through the side entrance at hours that had nothing to do with ordinary business. Conversation stopped when she moved through rooms, not aggressively, more like she was simply being extended the courtesy of not being made complicit in anything. Sung-Jin himself was a presence more than a person in those first days. She heard him more than she saw him. The low register of his voice behind closed doors. The particular silence that spread through the house whenever he was working. She learned things about him in fragments. That he took his coffee black and too hot, which Ji-Yun said he had done since long before either of them arrived. That he didn't eat breakfast most mornings, but would eat whatever was left in the kitchen at 2 in the afternoon without complaint. That he ran 5 miles every morning at 5 a.m. and came back looking like he'd been doing something much harder than running. That the East Wing, which she never entered, was the part of the house that mattered most to whatever he actually was. On the 11th morning, she went into the study to clean before 7 the way Mr. Cho had specified, and Sung-Jin was there. He was at his desk, jacket draped over the back of the chair, shirt sleeves rolled. There was a file open in front of him and a second coffee going cold beside it, which meant he'd been there long enough to forget about a cup of coffee, which, for a man as controlled as Park Sung-Jin, meant he was deeply in something. Naya did not retreat. She had learned already that the worst thing you could do in the presence of a certain kind of dangerous man was make yourself look like prey. She moved into the room quietly and began her work, keeping to the edges, not disturbing anything on the desk or the bookshelves. There was a photo on the third shelf. She noticed it because it was the only thing in the entire study that wasn't perfectly geometric in its placement. It sat at a slight angle, like it had been picked up and put down many times without anyone ever straightening it deliberately. A younger Sung-Jin, maybe mid-20s, and a woman. She was laughing at something off camera, head thrown back, unself-conscious. He was looking at her with an expression that his face, in the present day, seemed to have entirely forgotten how to make. Naya looked away quickly. She died. She stilled. His voice was quiet. Not emotional, but not the flat, transactional tone he used for household instructions either. Something in between. "I'm sorry," Naya said. Because she was. Because she meant it without calculation. He said nothing. She finished her work and left without another word. In the hallway outside the study, she stopped and pressed her back against the wall and breathed. Something about that exchange had moved something in her chest that she didn't entirely understand. She had spent 5 years with a man who treated grief as weakness and softness as an attack vector. And in 30 seconds, the most dangerous man she had ever been near had shown her a single, unguarded crack, and hadn't flinched from it. She thought about that for a long time. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Marcus Reeve was not grieving. Marcus had reported Naya missing to the police on day 3. He'd sat across from a detective with reddened eyes and a slightly loosened collar, the picture of a distraught husband, and answered every question with careful devastation. The detective had been sympathetic. They always were with Marcus. He had that quality of face that made people want to believe him. But behind the performance, Marcus was working methodically. He'd pulled Naya's phone records from the last week before she disappeared. He had access. He'd always had access. Controlling her phone had been the first thing, and traced the signal path to the north side of the city. He hired a private investigator named Garrett, a competent, unpleasant man who specialized in exactly this kind of work. Garrett had gotten close within a week. A photograph of the estate gates. A property registration.
A name.
Marcus stared at the photograph for a long time. He stared at the name longer. Something moved across his face that wasn't quite fear but was in the same family, a recalibration, the look of a man who has just discovered the terrain is more complicated than he mapped. Then the calculation finished, and the look became something colder. He picked up his phone. "I need everything you can find on the domestic staff currently employed at that property," he said. "Specifically, any woman hired in the last 2 weeks. If you're still watching, drop a comment right now and let us know. Are you Team Naya? And don't forget to like this video. Let's keep going." 2 days after Marcus made that call, Sung-Jin asked Naya to come to the study. She walked in and he was standing, not sitting, which she had learned was a signal that a conversation had weight. He placed a photograph on the desk and slid it toward her. It was a surveillance photo, long lens, slightly grainy, of a man standing outside the estate gate, camera in hand. "His name is Garrett," Sung-Jin said. "Private investigator. Your husband hired him 6 days ago. He photographed this property for 5 days before my security removed him." He paused. "Your husband's name is Marcus Reeve." Naya felt the floor tilt slightly. Not from surprise at the name, from the particular nausea of realizing that the thing you ran from had already found you, and you hadn't known. "Yes," she said. "Why is he looking for you?" She met his eyes directly. She had decided, somewhere in the last 11 days, that she would not be small in this house. That whatever she was navigating here, she would do it standing up. "Because I left him. And men like Marcus don't accept that." "Men like Marcus," Sung-Jin repeated. The kind who smile for everyone and save the real thing for when the door is closed. A silence. Sung-Jin was looking at her with that assessing quality she was becoming familiar with, not unkind but thorough, like he was confirming a calculation. You can stay, he said. She exhaled. And Marcus. He won't come here. How can you be sure? He picked up the photograph from the desk and held it for a moment, then set it back down with a finality that closed the subject. Because I'm going to make sure he understands the geography of what he's walking toward. Men like your husband move when they feel safe. His voice was level.
Exact.
I will make certain he does not feel safe. It was not warmth. It was not affection. It was something more precise than either of those things, and it landed in Naya's chest with a weight that she didn't know what to do with. She nodded once. She turned to leave.
Naya.
She stopped. Your feet have healed, he said. Not a question. Not even really a statement directed at her. It had the quality of something said aloud that was meant to stay internal. She walked out of the study and said nothing. She did not let herself think about what it meant that he had noticed. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Naya's life. Not because they were dangerous, though the danger was always present. A low current running under everything, the men who moved through the estate's side entrance, the conversations that shut down when she came near, the occasional late night when the house hummed with attention she had learned not to examine too closely. She had grown up understanding that the world had dark rooms, and she had married a man who kept his darkness so well hidden that she hadn't found it until she was already inside. Sung-Jin's darkness was different. It was present. It was known. And somehow that was less frightening than the kind that wore a perfect face. What made the week strange was the small things. Naya had a habit of eating late, or not eating at all during the busiest hours, pushing through on coffee, and then crashing after dinner service. She developed it during the marriage because Marcus monitored portions and commented on her appetite in ways that had, over time, made eating feel like a performance she didn't want to give. She hadn't even fully recognized it as a problem until the third week in the estate, when she came into the kitchen at 10:30 at night and found a covered plate on the counter with a folded note card beside it. The card was blank. The plate held food. She stood there looking at it for a moment, then looked at the kitchen door. No one. She sat down and ate. It happened again 2 nights later.
And the night after that.
No one acknowledged it. Ji-Yun did not prepare late plates. Naya had already learned Ji-Yun's work rhythm thoroughly enough to know that. Mr. Cho retired at 9. The other staff member, a driver named Yoon, was never in the kitchen. She filed it away and said nothing. Then the light in the hallway outside her room was replaced. She came back from her Sunday afternoon and found it brighter, a warmer, softer bulb, the kind that didn't throw harsh shadows. She had mentioned, offhand, to Ji-Yun 2 weeks before that she didn't sleep well. Just conversation. Just filling a quiet moment. And someone had been listening. These were not the gestures of a man performing care for an audience. They were private, deniable, the kind of thing that meant nothing if you didn't know what to look for, and meant everything if you did. Naya knew exactly what to look for, because she had spent 5 years in a house where no one left food for her and no one fixed the lights, and every small discomfort was either her fault or her problem. She thought about saying something to him. She rehearsed it in her head twice and then didn't, because some things are too fragile to name before they're ready. She saw him differently during this time, too. Not romantically. She was not ready for anything that could be called that, and she knew it, and she respected the knowing. But she saw him as a person in a way that the first weeks hadn't allowed. She saw the weight he moved through every day. The phone calls that required a certain stillness in his face that was clearly costing him something. The way he treated his men, not warmly, not with performed brotherhood, but with a specific, consistent code that she found herself, unexpectedly, respecting. She overheard him one evening through the partially open door of the south corridor, speaking to one of the younger men in his operation. The man had apparently used physical intimidation against a civilian debtor, not serious harm, but a line crossed. Sung-Jin's response was quiet. That was always the indicator. He went quiet the way a room goes dark before a power outage, and then he said, "We do not put hands on people who cannot fight back. Not for debt. Not for anything. That is not strength. That is cowardice wearing the wrong face. Do you understand the difference? The young man apparently did. Naya stood very still in the corridor until the conversation ended. She thought about a different man saying the words, "You brought this on yourself." She thought about the particular logic of abusers, that power justified itself, that the inability to fight back was an invitation. She didn't say anything to Sung-Jin that day either. But something in her chest rearranged itself. It was a Tuesday, the 5th week, when they actually talked. She found him on the back terrace at 11 at night, not unusual for him. She'd come to understand that he slept poorly and moved through the house at odd hours. She had come out for air after a hard evening of missing something she couldn't name, the particular grief of realizing how much of yourself you have given away to the wrong person. She stepped through the terrace door, and he was already there, standing at the railing, looking at the city lights below, and for one moment, she nearly went back inside. She didn't. She stood at the railing a few feet away and looked at the same view and said nothing for a while. He said nothing either. The silence was different from the household silence, not professional, not managed. Just two people occupying the same night. Then she said, "Tell me about her. If you want to, you don't have to." He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to. Then, "She was someone I was supposed to protect. I had a plan. I was building toward something, a life that made sense. I thought time was something I had control over."
He paused.
"I was wrong about that. What happened? The wrong people found out she mattered to me. I moved too slowly."
His jaw tightened briefly, then released.
"I don't move slowly anymore."
Naya took that in.
Then she said quietly, "I used to make elaborate meals for Marcus. Full dinners, everything from scratch. I thought if things were perfect enough, he'd have nothing to be angry about."
She stopped.
Laughed once, without humor. "It took me 5 years to understand that it was never about the food." "No," Sung-Jin said. "It never is." "What is it about?" "Control. The need for it. Some people can't tolerate the existence of someone else's peace because it makes them aware of their own disorder." Naya looked at him sideways. He was still watching the city, profile sharp against the dark. "That's the most words you've said to me at once." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Sung-Jin's face didn't quite arrange itself into smiles, but the suggestion of one. "Don't get used to it." She smiled. Really smiled, the kind that surprises you. Too late. The space between them held something charged and unnamed, and neither of them reached for it. But neither of them moved away from it either. They stood there until the city lights blurred slightly in the cool air, and then Naya said goodnight and went back inside, and Sung-Jin stayed at the railing a little longer, looking at the place where she'd been standing. Marcus Reeve had a problem, and his problem had a shape. He had made the mistake of sending a message. He'd managed it through a woman, a church acquaintance of Naya's from their old neighborhood, someone Naya might trust enough to stop and listen to. The woman had approached Naya at the market on a Saturday morning, during the approved errand hour that Mr. Cho allowed each week, and she'd pressed an envelope into Naya's hand and said, "Your husband asked me to give you this. He's very worried, honey. He just wants you home." Naya had looked at the woman, really looked at her, at the careful blankness of someone who had been told just enough and not too much, and she had taken the envelope and said, "Thank you," and she had walked back to the estate with every nerve in her body firing. She opened the envelope at the kitchen table before she told anyone. Inside was a single card in Marcus's handwriting.
Clean.
Controlled. Very Marcus. "Come home, Naya. This doesn't have to become something neither of us can come back from. The people hiding you are more dangerous than you understand. I'm giving you a chance to leave before they become your problem.
Come home. M."
She read it twice. Then she turned it face down on the table and sat with her hands flat on the surface for a moment. Then she went to Sung-Jin. He read the card without expression. He read it again. Then he set it down with the same precise finality she'd observed before, and he looked at her. "You came to me," he said. "Not a question. Not praise, exactly." But something in his voice registered it as significant.
"Of course I did," she said.
"This is your house. This is your world. I'm not going to manage his threats behind your back. Most people in your position would have been afraid to tell me." I'm afraid of a lot of things, Naya said. You're not one of them. He studied her for a moment. Then he called Mr. Cho and issued a series of quiet instructions that Naya mostly couldn't follow, partly language and partly code, and within the hour something had been set in motion that she was deliberately not being told the details of. That night, 2 of Marcus's associates were picked up in the city. Not harmed, just located, identified, and returned. Physically returned to a parking garage 2 blocks from Marcus's office, with a single playing card left on the dashboard of the car they arrived in. Naya didn't know what the card meant. But when Sung-Jin's man described the image to him later, Sung-Jin nodded once and said, "He'll understand." "And if he doesn't?" Mr. Cho asked. "Then we'll have a different conversation." Marcus understood. She didn't know that immediately, but she could feel the pressure of it ease over the next several days, the way you feel a change in weather before it arrives. Something in the texture of the threat shifted.
Pulled back.
Reassessed. What she didn't know was that Marcus had used the 2 days of quiet to do something far more methodical and far more dangerous. He had gotten on a plane. He had visited a federal prosecutor named Harlan Cross, a man who owed Marcus a significant professional debt going back 6 years, and he had sat across from Harlan in a private office and put a file on the table. "This is everything I know about Park Sung-Jin's operation," Marcus said. "Financial structures, transit routes, names. 18 months of intelligence I've been building quietly." He paused. "I want my wife back. I want her returned to me through a legal wellness check, under the framing of coercion by a dangerous third party. I want it handled cleanly." Harlan had looked at the file. He'd looked at Marcus. "And if Sung-Jin's lawyers push back on the wellness check framing?" "They won't get the chance," Marcus said. "Move fast enough and the whole operation goes down before anyone can make calls." Harlan had a great many reservations. He also had a great many reasons to do what Marcus asked. He told Marcus he'd need 72 hours to brief a team. Marcus flew home and waited. Meanwhile, Naya was learning what it felt like to exist without bracing. It was a strange sensation, arriving gradually, the way warmth comes back to a hand that's been cold for a long time. She caught herself laughing in the kitchen one morning at something Ji-Yun did, and then waiting, automatically, for the criticism that didn't come. She caught herself expressing a preference about where to put a new kitchen item, and then marveling at the fact that no one used it against her. Small reclamations. Daily ones. The rebuilding of a self that had been systematically taken apart over 5 years.
Sung-Jin noted.
She knew he noticed because his noticing had a quality she'd learned to read, not intrusive, not surveillance, but present. A man who paid close attention to everything in his world and had apparently decided she was part of what he paid attention to. One afternoon, she was arranging flowers in the main hall. Mr. Cho had given her the task, apparently a rotation between staff, and Sung-Jin came through and paused. He looked at the arrangement. "You moved the positioning from last week," he said. "The light's different in the afternoon," she said. "The last arrangement was fighting it. This way it works with it." He looked at the flowers. Then at her. "You pay attention to things." "I had to," she said simply. The words landed between them. He understood what she meant. She could see that he did. He said nothing more and walked on, but that evening the covered late plate in the kitchen had a note beside it, still blank, but this time folded differently, and when she opened it, she found a single line in precise, narrow handwriting. "You were right about the light." She stood at the kitchen counter holding that note for a long time. Outside, the city moved and breathed. And inside Park Sung-Jin's house, something was quietly, irreversibly shifting. Like this video if you're still here, because this story is about to change everything. Let's go. It was on a Thursday that everything collapsed at once. Naya was in the East Garden, a space she'd been permitted access to in recent weeks, when the energy of the house changed in a way she'd never felt before. Not the ordinary adjustment that came with Sung-Jin's movements. Something wider. Multiple people moving fast. She came back inside and found 2 of the suited men she recognized speaking rapidly with Mr. Cho, who looked at her when she walked in with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not calm. Not unreadable. Concerned. "Where's Sung-Jin?" she asked. "Miss Naya." "Where is he?" Mr. Cho told her. And then he told her the rest. They had taken her from the market. Not that morning. This was what Mr. Cho explained, methodically, watching her face as he did it. The Chong Syndicate had been watching Sung-Jin's operation for 4 months. They weren't after money or territory. Not directly. They were after something more precise. They were after what mattered to him. What made him move faster than calculation. What cracked the stillness. They had identified Naya 3 weeks ago. The abduction was clean and fast. 2 cars. A woman who asked her for directions as a distraction. A gap between the market security cameras that had not been accidental. By the time Naya's absence was flagged through Mr. Cho's network, she had been moved twice. Sung-Jin had received the call at 2:17 in the afternoon. Mr. Cho described what happened next the way you describe something that has permanently rearranged how you understand a person. He didn't raise his voice, Mr. Cho said. He didn't break anything. He went quiet, the kind of quiet that is not calm. And then he looked at me, and I have worked for this man for 9 years, and I have never been afraid of him until that moment. Sung-Jin had said 4 words. Bring me their location. What followed was not chaos. It was not rage. It was something worse, something that moved with the terrible logic of a man who had already let someone be taken from him once and had reorganized his entire life around never letting it happen again. He moved through the Chong Syndicate's operation like a disassembly. Not destruction for its own sake. Surgical removal. Every node, every layer between him and Naya, cleared with a precision that cost the Chong organization more in 1 afternoon than they had lost in the previous 3 years. Naya was in a room when she heard them coming. She hadn't been harmed. She understood now she'd been kept intact for the leverage, bait in a trap that was waiting to close. She'd spent the hours since the abduction doing the only thing that had ever actually helped her in impossible situations. She'd gotten very still inside, and she'd observed everything around her, and she'd waited. The sounds of what was happening in the rest of the building were not quiet, but they were controlled. The door opened. Sung-Jin stepped through.
No jacket.
His shirt had been through something she was not going to examine directly. He looked at her, full assessment, top to bottom, checking every visible surface for damage, and something in his face when he determined she was unharmed was so raw and so quickly shuddered that she almost reached for it. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," she said. He nodded once. He stepped back. He gestured toward the door. And in that gesture, in the particular way he positioned himself between her and the rest of the building, not dramatically, just functionally, just as a body between her and anything that might still be uncertain, Naya felt something shift so fundamentally inside her that she had to look away. She walked past him toward the exit. His hand, briefly and without announcement, covered hers. Not holding, not possessive, just present. The warmth of it, the weight, then gone. He said nothing. She said nothing. They drove back to the estate through the dark city, and the silence between them was not empty and not tense. It was full of everything neither of them had the language for yet. She went to bed. She did not sleep. He did not sleep either. The next morning she found him in the kitchen at 6, not his usual time, not his usual territory, standing at the counter with a second coffee, looking at nothing. She came in, assessed the situation, and made breakfast without comment. She set a plate in front of him.
He looked at it.
He looked at her. "Thank you," he said. 2 words, but they carried more than vocabulary. "You found me," she said. "I think that earns breakfast." He almost did the thing with his mouth that wasn't quite a smile, but was closer than usual. They ate in silence. The comfortable kind. It was 3 days later that Sung-Jin called her into the study and laid out the federal situation. He did it completely. No softening. No withheld details, no version of the truth shaped to protect her from the full weight of it. She had been very clear over weeks that she was not someone who needed protection from facts. He had apparently been listening. Marcus had given Harlan Cross everything. Financial structures, personnel, transit. The intelligence was credible and detailed, 18 months of building, methodical in a way that was terrifyingly Marcus. Cross was briefing a federal team. 72 hours, give or take, before they moved. "What are your options?" Naya asked. "Several. None clean." What happens to you if they move with that file? Significant legal exposure. We have attorneys, we have countermeasures, but a federal case with that level of documentation takes time to dismantle. Time costs other things. What things? He looked at her steadily. People who depend on the stability of this operation. She absorbed that. And Marcus gets what he wants. Marcus wants you back. The federal case is a delivery mechanism, not a goal. So, if I went back, you are not going back. The flatness of it. The absolute absence of negotiation. I'm not saying I would, she said carefully. I'm saying he designed this, so that seems like the path of least damage to everyone around me. I know how he designed it, and Marcus Reeve built this entire structure on the assumption that I would respond to threat by protecting my operation above everything else. A pause. He has incorrectly identified my priority. The air in the room changed. Naya held very still. What does that mean? Sung-Jin looked at her for a long moment. In 9 weeks, through fear and strangeness and slow warmth and a man taken apart and rebuilt by a single abduction, she had learned to read the landscape of his face. And what she was reading right now was not the controlled professional surface. It was something underneath. It means, he said, that I am not going to let him use the machinery of a system you already survived once to put you back into a situation that almost destroyed you. That is not negotiable for me.
He paused.
This is not about my operation. Do you understand what I'm telling you? She understood exactly what he was telling her. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried since the night she left, and she wasn't about to start now over something good. But her throat tightened and she held his gaze and she said, "Then what are we doing about it?" And Park Sung-Jin, for the first time in 9 years, smiled. Small and real, and for her. We, he repeated, like the word meant something particular.
Plan for 2, she said.
I told you that already. You did, he said. Sit down. What Marcus had built in 18 months, Sung-Jin dismantled in 48 hours. Not the federal case directly, that would take time, and Sung-Jin was patient in the way of people who understand that the fastest route between 2 points is not always a straight line. He went for the foundation instead. He went for Marcus. The thing about men who control through information is that they are also vulnerable through information. Marcus Reeve had spent 5 years carefully constructing a version of himself, credible, grieving, well-connected, a victim of a coerced wife and a criminal third party. That version had been assembled the way Marcus assembled everything, deliberately, with awareness of audience, with contingencies built in. What Marcus had failed to account for was that Park Sung-Jin had been constructing an intelligence network for 11 years. And that network, applied to one civilian with a 9-week lead time and a very specific motivation, was thorough in a way that Marcus had no frame of reference for. Within 24 hours, 3 things surfaced. The first, financial records tracing 18 months of unauthorized surveillance on Naya's personal accounts and communications, all predating her departure, all illegal, all conducted under Marcus's direct authorization. The surveillance hadn't just been post-departure tracking. It had been the architecture of control, documented control. The second, testimony from Garrett, the private investigator, who had documented his own instructions from Marcus in writing, including the explicit commission to photograph a private residence and gather intelligence on its occupants. This was not only illegal. It put Marcus at the center of a targeted harassment and surveillance operation against a protected property. The third, and this was the one that mattered most, was about Harlan Cross, the federal prosecutor who had been so motivated to move on Sung-Jin's operation. The debt Marcus had described as professional turned out to be considerably more specific than that, and the nature of it, once documented and delivered to the right desks through the right channels, made Harlan Cross's position regarding any federal case considerably more complicated. Harlan Cross, presented with what Sung-Jin's network had assembled, made the professionally sensible decision to distance himself from Marcus Reeve with significant speed. Without Cross, the federal case had no prosecutor. Without a prosecutor, it had no mechanism. The structure Marcus had built in 18 months collapsed inward in 48 hours. And then Marcus was arrested. Not for what he had done to Naya. The world moved slowly for that, and everyone in that study understood it without saying it. He was arrested for illegal financial surveillance, unauthorized intelligence gathering on private property, and attempted obstruction of justice in connection with Harlan Cross. The charges were not what they should have been, but they were real. And they were enough, for now, to put Marcus Reeve in a very small room and keep him there. Naya received the news from Mr. Cho, who came to find her in the kitchen and delivered it with the same careful neutrality with which he delivered all information. She stood at the counter and listened. She asked 2 questions. Then she thanked him, and he left. She stood alone in the kitchen for a long time. This was what it felt like when the thing you'd been running from was caught. Not triumphant. She'd expected triumphant, and it wasn't that. It was quieter. It was the particular silence of a door closing on something you'd spent years trying to lock behind you, and finally hearing the bolt slide home. She wasn't safe because Marcus was arrested. She understood that clearly. He had lawyers and resources, and the kind of face the world trusted. He would fight this. He might even eventually win parts of it. But right now, today, this morning, he was in a room he couldn't leave, and she was in a kitchen that smelled like coffee and warm bread, in a house where no one monitored her food or her phone or the angle of her laugh. She thought that was worth standing still for a moment. She made breakfast. Full spread. More than a regular morning warranted. She made the things she'd always loved to cook before Marcus had reduced cooking to an obligation with performance metrics. She made it because she wanted to, which was a reason she hadn't been allowed to have for a long time. Sung-Jin came into the kitchen at 7:15. He stopped in the doorway when he saw the table. "Mr. Cho told me," Naya said without turning from the stove. "I know. Sit down." He sat. She brought the food to the table and sat across from him, not on staff side, not maintaining the household distance she'd been careful about for weeks. She sat across from him like a person eating breakfast with another person. He looked at the food. He looked at her. "You cooked all of this for one morning," he said. "I cooked all of this because I felt like it," she said. "That's new for me." Something in his face shifted. He understood what she was saying. He always understood what she was saying. They ate. The city woke up outside the windows, the light changing from gray to gold, and the kitchen filled with all the ordinary sounds of a morning, the clink of utensils, the coffee going warm, the distant sound of Ji-Yun beginning work in the East Hall. Ordinary sounds. Naya had forgotten how safe ordinary sounds could feel. After a while, Sung-Jin set down his cup and looked at her with a directness she had come to understand was simply how he inhabited space. No performance. Just presence. "You're not staff anymore," he said quietly. "I think we've both known that for some time." Naya looked back at him. "Then what am I?" The question settled between them. He didn't rush it. She appreciated that he didn't rush it, that he gave the question the weight it deserved rather than reaching for an easy answer that would have cheapened it. "Stay," he said finally, "and we'll figure out the word for it." Naya was quiet for a moment. Then, "That might take a while." "I have time," he said. "If you do." She looked at him, this complicated, dangerous, precise man who had left food on her counter and fixed the light in her hallway and dismantled a federal case and crossed a city at speed to find her in a room she didn't know how to find herself. Who had told her about a woman in a photograph not because she asked but because she'd looked and looking had mattered. Who had said we and meant it.
"I have time," she said. She didn't say it was a yes.
She didn't say it was a beginning. But it was both of those things and they both knew it, and neither of them needed to say so. Outside, the city kept moving. Marcus Reeve sat in a room 2 miles away with no windows and a lawyer he'd just called. The Chong Syndicate was restructuring what remained of its operation. The estate hummed with its ordinary morning rhythms, guards rotating, Mr. Cho issuing instructions, Ji-Yun moving through the East Hall. And inside the kitchen, in the gold morning light, Naya, who had run with no shoes and a split lip and a folded napkin and 5 years of practiced smallness, sat across from the most dangerous man in the city and felt, for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, like herself. Not rescued. Not repositioned from one man's gravity to another's. Herself. The self that had been there the whole time, patient and intact, waiting for a room where she was allowed to take up space. She poured more coffee. He pushed his cup toward her. Some things don't need a word yet. Some things are allowed to just be what they are, warm and real, and still being built, in a kitchen where the light comes through the window, right, and someone finally thought to make it so. Naya had fled to survive. She hadn't expected to arrive somewhere. But here, in this strange and complicated place, beside this strange and complicated man, she had arrived.
Not at safety, exactly.
Something harder and more real than safety. She had arrived at herself. And that, after 5 years of being told she was nothing, was everything. That's the end of the story. If this story moved you, if Naya's journey hit somewhere deep, please hit that like button right now. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story, and drop a comment below telling me your favorite moment. Your support is what keeps these stories coming. See you in the next one.